I stood at the entrance of the flea market, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the bustling stalls. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, musty books, and a hint of something metallic. As a struggling artist, I had come here seeking inspiration, hoping that among the trinkets and forgotten relics, I might find a spark to ignite my creativity. As I wandered through the maze of stalls, my eyes were drawn to an old dusty painting propped against a rickety table. It was a portrait of a serene landscape, but there was something off about it, something that seemed to whisper to me, beckoning me closer. The painting's frame was ornate, almost regal, and the colors, though faded, hinted at a time when it must have been magnificent. "How much for this?" I asked the vendor, an elderly man with a leathery face and a glint of mischief in his eyes. He eyed me for a moment before responding,
$20, but be warned, that painting has a history.
Intrigued and undeterred, I handed over the money and carefully carried the painting home. My small apartment was cluttered with canvases, brushes, and sketches, evidence of countless failed attempts to create something meaningful. I hoped this painting might change my luck. That night, I hung the painting on the wall opposite my bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt an odd sense of unease, as if the painting were watching me. Dismissing the feeling as fatigue, I closed my eyes and succumbed to sleep. In the morning, I awoke to find the painting had changed. The serene landscape was now a scene of chaos and despair. People in the painting appeared to be screaming, their faces contorted in agony. My heart raced as I examined the painting, but there was no explanation for the transformation. Days turned into nights, and each morning I awoke to find the painting had changed again. The scenes grew more disturbing with each passing day, figures writhing in pain, shadows looming ominously, and eyes filled with terror. My own artwork began to reflect the horror I saw each night, my once vibrant and hopeful pieces now dark and twisted. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in front of the painting, staring into its depths. As the hours ticked by, I felt a chill run down my spine. The figures in the painting seemed to move, their eyes following me, mouths silently screaming for help. And then, among the tortured faces, I saw my own reflection, terrified, trapped within the painting. Panic surged through me. I needed to understand the curse that had befallen me. Desperation led me to the internet, where I scoured forums and ancient texts, looking for any clue about the painting's origins. What I found was a legend about a cursed artist who had imbued their pain and suffering into their final masterpiece. The painting was said to depict the fate of its owner, dooming them to a life of torment. Determined to break the curse, I decided to confront the painting head-on. I gathered my art supplies and began to paint over the cursed image, hoping to reclaim my life through my own art. As I painted, I felt a strange resistance, as if the painting were fighting back. Hours turned into days, and my strength waned, but I refused to give up. On the final night, exhausted and barely able to hold my brush, I added the last stroke. The painting before me was now a depiction of hope, a sun rising over a tranquil landscape, banishing the shadows. I collapsed into bed, praying I had broken the curse. Morning came, and with it a sense of peace. The painting remained unchanged, its serene scene a stark contrast to the horrors that had plagued me. Relieved, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, my creativity flowing freely once more. But as I left the apartment to take a walk and clear my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced back at the painting and froze. There, in the corner of the serene landscape, was a small figure, an artist, brush in hand, painting desperately. My blood ran cold as I realized the figure was me, trapped within my own creation. The curse had not been broken. It had only transferred to me. My fate was now sealed within the painting I had tried to conquer, a chilling reminder that fate cannot be changed. And as time passes, my figure in the painting grows more desperate, more terrified, as if I am calling out for help that will never come.
The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun set behind the row of houses on Maple Street. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and children played freely in their front yards. Among these children was a little girl named Riley, whose curiosity often led her to the most intriguing places. One summer evening, While riding her bike around the block, Riley noticed something peculiar. A moving truck had parked in front of the old abandoned house at the end of the street. It had been vacant for years, a place whispered about in hushed tones by the neighborhood kids. But today it was alive with activity. Strange-looking furniture and bizarre artifacts were being unloaded by people dressed in long, dark robes. Riley stopped her bike and watched, her wide eyes absorbing every detail. The new neighbors were unlike anyone she had ever seen. They wore hooded cloaks even in the summer heat and moved with an eerie grace that made her shiver. As she stood there, one of the movers glanced in her direction, and Riley felt a chill run down her spine. The man's eyes were a pale, milky white. That night, Riley couldn't stop thinking about the new neighbors. At dinner, she asked her parents if they knew who had moved in, but they simply shrugged and said they hadn't had a chance to meet them yet. Determined to learn more, Riley decided to investigate on her own. The next day, Riley set off towards the mysterious house. She walked up the cracked pathway and peeked through the window. Inside, she saw the strangest sight. A room filled with old books, jars of strange substances, and what looked like a cauldron. The air seemed to shimmer, and she could swear she heard whispers coming from within. Before she could pull away, the front door creaked open, and an elderly woman stepped out. She was tall and thin, with silver hair that flowed like a waterfall down her back. Her eyes were dark and piercing, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but commanding.
"Hello, little one. What brings you here?"
Riley stammered.
I'm really... I live down the street. I was just curious.
The woman smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes.
Curiosity is a dangerous thing, really. But you are welcome to visit. We do enjoy company.
With that, the woman turned and walked back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Against her better judgment, Riley found herself stepping through the threshold. The inside of the house was even stranger than she had imagined. It was filled with ancient-looking furniture, peculiar trinkets, and walls covered in intricate symbols. Over the next few weeks, Riley visited the house often, drawn by a strange compulsion she couldn't explain. The neighbors, who she learned were named Matilda and Erasmus, always welcomed her warmly, offering her strange-tasting cookies and telling her stories that sent shivers down her spine. But as time went on, Riley began to notice unsettling things. She saw Matilda and Erasmus chanting in front of a roaring fire late at night, their faces twisted in concentration. She found small carved figurines hidden around the neighborhood, each one bearing an uncanny resemblance to the local children, and worst of all, she heard whispers in her mind, calling her to the house even when she tried to stay away. One night, Riley decided to confront Matilda and Erasmus. She had to know the truth about who they were and what they were doing. She crept out of her house after her parents had gone to bed and made her way to the end of the street. As she approached the house, the air grew cold, and the whispers grew louder. The front door was open, and a soft, flickering light beckoned her inside. Riley stepped over the threshold and found herself in a dark hallway. The light was coming from the basement, and she could hear chanting from below. Gathering her courage, she descended the stairs. The basement was filled with shelves of old books, jars of unknown substances, and a large stone altar in the center. Matilda and Erasmus stood before the altar, their eyes closed as they chanted in a language Riley didn't understand. Suddenly the chanting stopped and the room fell silent. Matilda opened her eyes and looked directly at Riley.
"Ah, our little visitor has arrived. We've been expecting you."
Riley's heart pounded in her chest.
What are you doing?
Erasmus stepped forward, her eyes gleaming.
"We are practitioners of the old ways, Riley, and we have decided to keep you."
Riley took a step back, but Matilda held up a hand.
"Do not be afraid, child. Soon, very soon, you won't even remember why you were ever afraid at all."
Before Riley could respond, the room began to spin. She felt herself being pulled towards the altar, her limbs moving against her will. The whispers in her mind grew louder, and she felt a strange sensation wash over her. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the basement. She was standing in a dark forest, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The air was thick with fog, and she could hear the sound of chanting all around her. She turned and saw Matilda and Erasmus standing before her, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Back on Maple Street, The house at the end of the street stood silent and dark. The neighbors would whisper about the strange family that had moved in and the little girl who had disappeared without a trace. But no one ever knew the truth about what had happened to Riley.
Tyler and Liam had always been passionate about hiking. Their love for the outdoors often led them to explore remote and lesser-known trails, seeking the thrill of adventure. This time, they decided to venture into the dense, uncharted woods of North Ontario, a place whispered about in local legends. The forest was vast and ancient, a labyrinth of trees that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It was early morning when they set out, the sun just beginning to rise, casting long shadows through the canopy of leaves above. The air was crisp, and the earthy scent of the forest floor filled their lungs. Tyler, the more experienced of the two, led the way with a confident stride, while Liam followed, his excitement barely contained. As the day progressed, the forest grew thicker, the paths more obscure. The towering trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches forming a natural cathedral overhead. The further they ventured, the more the sounds of civilization faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of distant wildlife. By late afternoon, they found themselves hopelessly lost. The trail markers had long since disappeared, and every direction looked the same. Tyler tried to mask his growing unease, but Liam could see the worry in his friend's eyes.
"We should turn back,"
Liam suggested, glancing nervously at the darkening sky.
"We've been walking for hours, and we haven't seen any sign of the trail."
Tyler shook his head.
"Let's keep going a little longer. We might find something up ahead. Besides, turning back now could be just as risky. We might be closer to finding our way out than we think."
Reluctantly, Liam agreed, and they pressed on. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest took on a more sinister atmosphere. Shadows lengthened, and the temperature dropped. They walked in silence, their senses heightened, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves putting them on edge. Just as the last light of day faded, they stumbled upon something unexpected. An old, overgrown path, barely visible through the underbrush, led them to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient cemetery, its gravestones worn and weathered by time. The sight was both eerie and captivating, a forgotten relic of a bygone era.
"Whoa, look at this,"
Liam whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear.
"How old do you think this place is?"
Tyler walked cautiously among the graves, reading the inscriptions barely legible beneath the moss and grime.
"Late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. This place must have been abandoned for decades."
The cemetery was small, surrounded by a rusted iron fence. The gravestones were arranged haphazardly, some leaning precariously, others cracked and broken. At the far end of the clearing stood a decrepit mausoleum, its stone doors slightly ajar. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, Tyler approached the mausoleum.
"Let's check it out,"
he said, his curiosity outweighing his sense of caution. Liam hesitated but followed, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. As they neared the entrance, a foul odor emanated from within, a mix of decay and something far more unsettling. Tyler pushed the doors open wider, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth.
Maybe we should leave this alone,"
Liam suggested, his voice trembling. But Tyler was already descending the steps, his flashlight cutting through the darkness.
"Come on, we might find something interesting."
Reluctantly, Liam followed, the feeling of dread growing stronger with each step. The air grew colder and damper as they descended, the smell of rot becoming almost unbearable. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small chamber lined with stone coffins. The sight was macabre, but what truly horrified them was the state of the coffins. Many were open, their lids cast aside, and the skeletal remains within appeared to have been disturbed, as if something had clawed its way out.
"Tyler, we need to go,"
Liam urged, his voice barely above a whisper.
"This place isn't right."
Before Tyler could respond, A low growl echoed through the chamber. They spun around, their flashlights illuminating the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows were figures that defied explanation, skeletal remains animated by an unnatural force, their empty eye sockets glowing with a malevolent light. Tyler and Liam backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. The undead figures moved towards them with a slow, deliberate gait, their bones creaking with each step. In a panic, they scrambled up the stairs, the creatures in close pursuit. Reaching the surface, they bolted towards the forest, the sound of shuffling feet and inhuman growls echoing behind them. They ran blindly, the darkness and underbrush conspiring to trip them at every step. Tyler stumbled, his ankle twisting painfully, but he forced himself to keep moving. They burst into another clearing, and for a moment it seemed they had escaped. But their relief was short-lived. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and from the forest emerged a new horror. A towering figure with elongated limbs, its skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Its eyes burned with a predatory hunger, and its maw was filled with razor-sharp teeth.
It's a Wendigo!
Liam yelled, recognizing the creature from the old legends. The Wendigo let out a bone-chilling scream and charged towards them. Tyler and Liam split, running in opposite directions. The creature hesitated for a moment before pursuing Liam, its strides long and unnaturally fast. Liam ran with every ounce of strength he had, his lungs burning, his heart feeling like it would burst from his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, the Wendigo was faster. He could feel its hot breath on his neck, its claws raking at his back. Just as he thought he was done for, a sudden blinding light filled the clearing. The Wendigo let out a roar of pain and recoiled, giving Liam a moment to escape. He stumbled into a thicket, his vision blurry, and collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. When he came to, the forest was silent, and the light had vanished. He was alone, bruised and battered, but alive. He called out for Tyler, but there was no response. Desperation and fear gripped him as he realized he had no idea where he was. Gathering his strength, he began to walk, hoping to find his way back to the trail. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. Just as he was about to give up, he stumbled upon a familiar sight, the old cemetery. But something was different. The gravestones were pristine, the iron fence intact, and the mausoleum sealed shut. It was as if time had reversed itself. Confused and terrified, Liam approached the cemetery, hoping to find some clue about what had happened. As he neared the mausoleum, he noticed a fresh grave in the center of the clearing. His heart sank as he read the inscription on the headstone. Tyler Jameson, 2005 to 2024. Liam fell to his knees, a sob escaping his lips. His best friend was gone, buried in a place that shouldn't exist. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Liam heard a familiar growl behind him. He turned to see the undead figures emerging once more, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. And standing among them, with a twisted grin on his face, was Tyler. The last thing Liam saw was his friend's outstretched hand, cold and skeletal, reaching for him as the darkness closed in. In the quiet, forgotten corners of the world, some legends are best left undiscovered. And in the heart of North Ontario's woods, the forgotten cemetery claimed 2 more souls, their stories lost to the whispers of the trees.
In a small, quiet town, nestled between rolling hills and whispering woods, lived a girl named Eliza. She resided alone in an old house, its wooden beams creaking with secrets and shadows. Each night, as darkness cloaked the world, she would drift into slumber, only to be haunted by strange, unsettling dreams that pulled her from the depths of sleep. One night, as the moon hung low and heavy in the sky, Eliza was jolted awake by a particularly eerie dream. She lay in bed, heart pounding, the remnants of the dream fading like mist. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, she slipped out of bed and made her way to the yard. The cool night air prickled her skin as she approached the wooden fence that enclosed her property. There, in the fence, was a tiny hole she had never noticed before. Curiosity gnawed at her, and she leaned forward, pressing her eye to the hole. All she saw was red, a vivid, unnerving crimson that filled her vision. She frowned, her mind racing.
It must be my neighbors.
She murmured to herself.
Putting up a new shed or something, just a new red shed.
With a shrug, she dismissed it as a product of her restless dreams and returned to bed. The next night, the same unsettling pattern repeated. Eliza woke up, drenched in sweat, her dreams a tangled web of fear and confusion. Drawn once more to the yard, she peered through the hole in the fence. Again, all she saw was red. The vivid color seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own. She shook her head, trying to shake off the lingering dread, and went back inside. This continued night after night, the red image through the fence haunting her waking moments as much as her dreams. Each time, she told herself it was nothing more than a bad dream, a trick of the mind. But as the week wore on, her anxiety grew, casting long shadows over her days. One particularly cold night, Eliza was wrenched from sleep by a dream more terrifying than any before. In the dream, she stood face to face with a ghostly figure. Its eyes, burning with an intense, unearthly red, bored into her soul. She screamed, bolting upright in bed, the image seared into her mind. The ghost was gone, but the fear lingered. Trembling, she made her way outside, her bare feet cold against the grass. She approached the fence once more, but this time, when she peered through the hole, the red was gone. Instead, she saw her neighbor's yard, still and ordinary under the moonlight. Panic clawed at her chest, and she hurried back inside, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Desperate to calm herself, she splashed cold water on her face in the bathroom. As she looked up, her reflection stared back, wide-eyed and terrified. But something was wrong. Her eyes were red.
Little is known for certain about his early life, but the legend of Sawney Bean begins in the shadowy mists of East Lothian in the late 15th century. Born into obscurity, he was a tanner by trade. The latter part of his life, however, unfolds into a horrifying tale of unimaginable terror and brutality. After relocating to Ayrshire and marrying, Sawney Bean and his new bride found a home in the foreboding Benane Cave near Ballantrae. This was no ordinary cave. Its labyrinthine tunnels stretched for more than a mile, delving deep into the heart of solid rock. Side passages branched off like the veins of some monstrous beast, providing ample space for the couple to convert and expand over the next 25 years. The cave's entrance, submerged by the sea at high tide, served as a natural barrier, hiding their grim secrets from prying eyes. With no honest means to support his wife, Sawney turned to robbery. The isolated roads of Ayrshire offered easy prey, and it wasn't long before he realized that to truly evade capture, he must eliminate his victims entirely. Thus began a reign of terror as he butchered his prey, ensuring their flesh provided sustenance for his growing family. The high-protein diet worked wonders, and Mrs. Bean bore 14 children, each one nurtured on a macabre feast of human flesh. As the children grew, so did their insatiable hunger. Incestuous unions produced another generation of beanies, each one more twisted than the last. They honed their gruesome skills, mastering the dark arts of murder and cannibalism, preserving the flesh of their victims through salting and pickling. Disembodied limbs and decaying organs occasionally washed ashore, a grim testament to the family's ghastly appetites. The local authorities, baffled by the ever-growing list of missing persons, launched numerous searches but never thought to probe the depths of Benane Cave. The Beans, emboldened by their success, grew bolder and more organized. Military-style ambushes claimed as many as 6 victims at a time, the bodies dragged back to the cave to be meticulously butchered and prepared for consumption. But even the most meticulously planned operations can go awry. One fateful evening, the Bean clan attacked a couple returning from a fair. The woman was swiftly dispatched and disemboweled, but the man fought back with a ferocity born of sheer desperation. As he struggled, a group of fairgoers stumbled upon the scene. Outnumbered for the first time, the Bean clan fled, leaving behind a scene of carnage and a furious, grief-stricken husband. The survivor was taken to the Chief Magistrate of Glasgow, who, horrified by the tale and the mounting evidence of pickled body parts, appealed directly to King James I. The king, equally appalled, mustered an army of 400 men and a pack of tracker dogs, initiating one of the largest manhunts in Scottish history. The search scoured the Ayrshire countryside, and finally, the dogs caught the scent of decaying flesh near a waterlogged cave. The troops, torches in hand, ventured into the murky depths of Benane Cave. What they found defied all reason. Human limbs and body parts hung like grotesque decorations along the damp walls. Piles of clothing, rings and bones littered the cave, remnants of countless grisly feasts. The Bean family, numbering 48, fought desperately, but were overpowered and dragged to Edinburgh. Their crimes were so heinous that traditional justice was forsaken. The next day, the 27 men of the family were dismembered alive, their agonizing deaths a grim mirror of their own savagery, while the 21 women were burned at the stake like witches. The Ballad of Sawney Bean records their fate. They've hung them high in Edinburgh toon, and likewise their kin. And the wind blaws called on their banes, and tae hell they a hae gain. And so the terror of Sawney Bean came to a brutal end, his family consigned to the flames and their memory to the darkest pages of history.